Good morning, everybody. Today you're going to have a talking head for a professor. Hopefully this is going to work out well and you can keep up with the things. What you need to do is in some way you need to pull up the PowerPoint for thinking, language, and intelligence, and that's what I'm going to be going over today. The nice part about this is you can stop me at any time. You can jot notes down because sometimes I go very fast in class. You can play me over again, or sometimes you can just mute me if you feel like it. So here we go. Thinking, language, and intelligence. As we look at the first slide then, the slide is about thinking. Bottom line, another term for thinking is simply cognition. It's all of our mental activities that are associated with processing, understanding, remembering, and communicating. Now, one of the things that really concerned me when I went back for my doctorate was, can I keep up with some of the younger students that are going to be in the class? And I might have even mentioned in class before that when I started back, I was 48 years old, and the next youngest student was in his early 30s, and the youngest student was 26. So I was really concerned about that, and some of you may share the same kinds of concerns. But what I did find was that while my processing speed seemed to be a little bit slower than some other people's, I was able to really kind of, based on my prior knowledge and based on my experiences, able to put things together a little bit better, and that wound up actually having a higher GPA than most of the other students in the class. Now, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but sometimes when I'm talking and I begin to think about the things that I'm saying, usually like when I'm talking to you right now, it's just flowing. It's just coming out. I'm not necessarily thinking about it. I just know where I'm going with it. Unless, of course, you know, as it happens in class sometimes, oh, butterfly. But anyways, and there's a little bit more of a possibility that that'll happen here since I'm taping this at home and our Great Dane is laying right down there. So all of a sudden you may see a head pop up into the video and there she is. But back to metacognition. So what happens sometimes is if we get really wrapped up in thinking about the things that we're thinking about, that's metacognition. We're really paying attention to our thought processes at that point. Now, all of us have come across what we know as a concept. So if I say to you, describe a desk, most of you will describe something on which you write. It might be a student desk. It might be the desk in front of the classroom. It might be the desk like the one that I'm sitting at right now, you know, those kinds of things. But when we say desk, we all have a general concept of what desk means. So that's the concept. It's a mental grouping of similar things together. However, a prototype is the best example. It's like the latest and best. So if you've ever gone to, let's say, a car show, and you've seen some of the prototypes that they have there. By the way, did you know that by 2010 we're going to have flying cars? I'll let that sink in for a moment. Yes, I said by 2010. That was the forecast back in the 1980s, that we were going to actually be flying around rather than using automobiles that still had wheels on them touching the ground. However, we can see now it's 2018, we still don't have flying cars. However, that's two howevers. Anyways, what I did hear, actually, just maybe about a couple of weeks ago, was that there is another forecast that in another, 12 years, so it's by 2030, they will actually have some kind of flying cars that will be on the roads. But now think about this. You heard about self-driving cars. If you've ever seen the movie iRobot, in iRobot there are self-driving cars. And you can take the car back again if you want to drive manually. That's the future. What do we have now? We already have self-driving cars. Now, we know that there's some glitches with them. And I think actually the one that, I think it was Uber, that there was an accident in which a woman was killed. I realize it's under an investigation and everything, but realistically, if it would have been a human being behind the wheel, probably the same thing would have happened. So I don't necessarily think that artificial intelligence can be blamed for that one. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide and solving problems. Now, if you use what's known as the algorithmic method of solving problems, what you're going to do is you're going to go down through step by step, look at all of the possible solutions, then out of that you're going to choose one of them. Notice that the algorithmic method guarantees that you'll arrive at a solution, not necessarily the correct solution, but you will arrive at a solution. Whereas the heuristic method is pretty much the first thing that seems to be right. That's the one that you're going to go with. The problem is that the heuristic method is often prone to coming up with actually the wrong answer. And just to give you an example, sometimes on my multiple choice tests, I'll have the question, and then you look at letter A, and letter A seems right. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to put that down. You fail to look at letters B, C, and D, only to find when you go back and look at the test again, letter B was also correct, letter C was also correct, letter D was all of the above. Had you used the algorithmic method and gone through all of the possible answers, it would have greatly increased the likelihood that you would have gotten the correct answer, which would be D, rather than putting the first one that seemed right, which was the heuristic method and is letter A. Okay, so hopefully that gives you kind of an example that you can think about. Have you ever, oh man, I'm just thinking about something, and I just can't get the answer, and it's just, it's driving me crazy. Ever happened to you? Later in the day, not even thinking about it anymore. All of a sudden, boom! Light bulb goes off over the top of your head, and it makes sense. That's insight. That's when all of a sudden all the tumblers mesh together, the planets align, and everything seems like, yes, I understand it now. That's an insight. Sudden realization of a solution to a problem. And how about confirmation bias? Now, when we stop to think about that, let's say that you've been talking with one of your friends, and one of your friends tells you a little bit talking trash about somebody. Now, you've never met him before. So let's say that, Jared's talking trash about Lisa. And now I go and meet Lisa. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start looking for all of those things that will confirm what I already think about that person. And so when I come away from the conversation with Lisa, she could be the most wonderful person in the whole wide world, but I went in with a bias, and now I pick out all of those things that she said that seem to confirm the bias that I already had. So that's the confirmation bias. And how do we make decisions? I mean, how do you decide which way you're going to turn if you're driving along and you're not quite sure which way to go? This happened to me. My wife and I were going over to a place called Shady Maple. And some of you may be like, oh, yeah, I know where Shady Maple is. Oh, yeah. So when my wife and I go over there, usually we'll take Route 625 that goes through Bowmansville and comes out to 23, and there's a T there. And if you look to the right, you can notice that Shady Maple is off in the distance there, and you can just turn right and maybe about a quarter mile or so turn left and back into the parking lots and go to Shady Maple. Well, my wife and I were in Wernersville, and we decided we wanted to go to Shady Maple. But it was really kind of out of the way to go all the way down to 625 and then up that way. And I knew that 895 took you over to 23. I was aware of that. Took you in the right direction. So now we get 895. I think it's 895 or 897, something like that. And we get to the T at 23, and now the question is, do I turn right or do I turn left? Now, this is something you may not be aware of regarding me, and that is, and this is true, probably 9 times out of 10, when I am given a 50-50 chance, I'll choose the wrong one. Most of the time, I'm wrong. So my gut is telling me, as we're sitting at this intersection, turn left. But I know then 9 times out of 10 I'm wrong. So I decide I'm going to turn right. So I went right and wound up in blue ball. That is the availability heuristic. We go based on the things that we know, what is available to us at that moment, and that's how we make a judgment. Now, have you ever come across somebody that is absolutely sure they're right about things? They know that what they're saying is 100% absolutely right. That would be overconfidence. Almost like when you say in one of your papers, something proves something else, that's actually demonstrating overconfidence rather than saying, well, it's likely, most likely, probably. That's all, tentative language. And I know in some circumstances it's really important to be confident or overconfident or whatever the case is, but not necessarily. And then how about belief perseverance? Belief perseverance is even if someone shows you that what you're thinking, what you're doing is absolutely wrong, and they give you a really good list of reasons, and they show you empirical evidence and the whole 9 yards, and still you're going to hang on to that belief. No matter what, you absolutely know that you're true, or that you're right. That's belief perseverance. Now, one of the things that, by the way, we're moving on to the next slide on problem solving. I keep forgetting to tell you to move on to the next slide. I'm doing it, but hopefully you'll realize that. The slide on problem solving, one of the things that I've found with a lot of students is that they've never really understood what are the steps that someone goes through in solving a problem. And so we've learned through our histories, this is kind of how we do it, and we base it on the way our parents did it or whatever the case is, but realistically, what's a good way of solving problems? And so I thought that this was important to bring out the steps in problem solving. And if you'll notice that the very first step is you have to identify what the problem is. So let's say that my wife is waiting for me, and I'm late. And when I come in, she is really angry with me. And by the way, this really doesn't happen. I'm making this up as I go along, just an FYI. She's really angry with me, and she begins to tell me about all of the times that I've been late. So if we look at that, we may think at the very first, the problem is I'm late. The reality is, the real problem is, she feels disrespected, that she's not important enough for me to be on time and show her that kind of respect. So in many situations, what seems to be the presenting problem, what seems to be on the surface, is not necessarily the problem. For example, why do students procrastinate? Well, there's so many different reasons why somebody might procrastinate, and one of those reasons is they might be afraid, or they might be a perfectionist. And if they can't do something absolutely right, they figure it has to be perfect the first time, then they put off doing it and put off doing it. And so, it's important to look at what is the real problem. Once you identify the problem, what are some possible solutions? And go from the ridiculous to the sublime. It's a continuum. And so you can start out with something that seems to be absolutely right, but look at all the possible solutions. And when you look at all the possible solutions, now you start to weigh what are the pros and cons of each of those possible solutions. Do the pros outweigh the cons? Do the cons outweigh the pros? And it doesn't necessarily matter the number. What matters is the importance to you. If the pros outweigh the cons, you might have a tendency to go toward that solution. If the cons outweigh the pros, then you get rid of that for a while. Now, where a lot of people get stuck is number 4. The fourth part, or the fourth step in problem solving, is choosing a solution. Once again, people are looking for the perfect solution. They're looking for the one that's not going to have any cons. Well, folks, that's not going to happen. Every solution has a drawback. And so you need to look at and weigh what those drawbacks are, and if you think you're going to get more benefit out of it than the drawbacks. It's even like taking a medication. All medications have side effects. The question is, do the benefits outweigh the side effects? Next is follow the solution all the way to the end. One of the problems that people have too is if it's not quite working out the way they want it to, they stop. If I don't get the grades that I want to, I withdraw from the class. Stick it out all the way to the end. At the very least, at the end of that, you'll be able to say, okay, not only did I stick it out, and it's called commitment, but also, did it work out the way I wanted to? And if it didn't, why not? You can really evaluate it, which, by the way, is the next step, is evaluate the process. Evaluate, did the solution work? If it worked, great. If it didn't work, go back and choose another solution. If it worked but not quite the way you wanted it to, then maybe you need to tweak it through things. But through all of this, stay focused. Don't be like your professor that, like I said before, oh, butterfly, that kind of thing. But stay focused on solving the problem. Okay, so while that may not be something that's necessarily in your textbook or whatever, I think it's a good life lesson for us to really learn how to solve problems, to tackle problems. Next is language. Now, what I'd like you to do is I hope you've downloaded this PowerPoint. And in so doing, you can pull up the PowerPoint because the one on language has a really good video that is attached to it. So the language is underlined. So click on that, and what you'll find then is a really good video on the first year of language. Language is something that is spoken, written, signed, or ways we combine them to communicate meaning. Language can be nonverbal as well as verbal. So when a child is beginning to communicate with the parents from birth up until about age 4 months, there's crying, there's laughing, there's making all kinds of gurgling sounds and that sort of thing. Okay? And when you first bring a baby home from the hospital, you're really not sure what a cry means. Different cries we learn after the child's been with us for a while. We learn that different cries mean different things. One cry might mean, I need my diaper changed. Another might mean, I want to be helped. One might mean, I'm really angry with you. And if you've ever seen an angry baby, you know what I'm talking about. Then after that comes the babbling stage. Now, as it also explains in the video that I want you to watch, this babbling stage, the baby is making repetitive sounds like ba 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 ba, those kinds of things. This is when parents get all excited. It's like, oh my gosh, the baby said dada or mama. Okay, really what's happening is they're rehearsing the precursors to language. All right, they're making all of the sounds. And I think Jason might have said something about phonemes. It could be a faulty memory here or something like that. One of my students said something about phonemes, and this would be an example of what those are. These are the building blocks of language. Interestingly, infants in this age range across all cultures make the same sounds. They have the same abilities to make those sounds. Okay? It seems, however, once the child has acquired the actual language of the family, then they lose the ability to say certain sounds and distinguish between certain sounds. So just to kind of tuck that away and remember that. Then by the time the child is 1 to 2 years of age, they get into what is known as the one-word stage, where the child is speaking predominantly in one word. So the child will say juice. Now you have to figure out, does that mean apple juice, orange juice, milk, water, vodka? Oh no, scratch that one. It better not mean vodka. But anyways, so what exactly does that mean? And so the child will use one word, like when we talked about acquisition and accommodation and assimilation, that child might say doggy for anything that has 4 legs, 2 ears, and a tail. Okay. Now, that's known as overextension. A holophrase, also known as telegraphic speech, then is where the child will use 1 or 2 words to have an entire meaning. So you're getting ready to go out. and all of a sudden your 18-month-old is running towards you, arms extended, saying, "Go bye-bye." By the way, bye-bye is hyphenated, counts as one word.